The text arrived between helping customers at my boutique. My phone vibrated against the polished cherrywood counter as I carefully wrapped a cashmere scarf in tissue paper for Mrs. Montgomery, one of my most loyal customers. She was chatting about her daughter's upcoming wedding when I felt the buzz, but I didn't check it until I'd completed the sale, maintaining the personal touch that had become Lumiere Boutique's signature. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't waver as I helped Mrs. Montgomery decide between emerald and sapphire for her mother of the bride ensemble. The only sign that my husband of 12 years had just nuked our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes, a micro-expression that no one watching would have caught. The sapphire brings out your eyes beautifully, I said, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck, my smile professional and warm. Despite the ice forming in my chest, it complements your skin tone perfectly. I waited until Mrs. Montgomery left her purchase, wrapped in our signature silver paper, with the delicate lavender ribbon I'd specially ordered from France, before typing my response. Good luck. My name is Olivia Keller, and at 38, I just received possibly the most callous goodbye in marital history. But while Daniel was probably gloating over his grand exit, imagining me in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The familiar ritual of checking the register, securing the displays, and setting the alarm, bringing a steadying rhythm to a moment that might have otherwise sent me spiraling. The signs had been there for months, accumulating like the first snowflakes of winter, seemingly insignificant until suddenly the ground is covered. The late nights at work that never matched his paid deposits, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd started going to the gym religiously after 15 years of claiming he didn't have time for exercise, the new clothes, the expensive haircuts, the midlife crisis cliches that would have been comical if they weren't happening in my marriage. 3 months ago, while sorting through the mail, I'd found a receipt for dinner for two at Maison Azur, an expensive French restaurant downtown, on a night Daniel had claimed to be working late on the Johnston account. That same evening after he'd fallen asleep, I'd opened a separate bank account at First National, a different bank than the one we'd used throughout our marriage. A week later, when Daniel mentioned wanting to combine our accounts to simplify things, with that disingenuous smile that never quite reached his eyes, I'd agreed cheerfully, while simultaneously transferring most of my personal savings to the new account, the joint account he'd just emptied with such gleeful malice. It contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious about 2 months' worth of regular deposits from my boutique's profits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he had made over the past year, meticulously documented in a spreadsheet that would have impressed forensic accountants. The autumn air held a crisp chill as I left the boutique, pulling my camel-colored wool coat tighter around me. The historic district of Burlington, Vermont, was particularly beautiful this time of year. The maple trees lining Church Street displaying their brilliant red and orange foliage. I'd chosen this location for Lumiere 5 years ago, precisely for its charm, the exposed brick walls inside the large display windows facing the pedestrian marketplace, the steady flow of tourists and local professionals with disposable income. Daniel had called it a risky investment at the time. Now it was the cornerstone of a business that grossed more annually than his middle management position at Hartwell Investments. My phone buzzed again as I walked to my car, a sleek charcoal Audi that I'd purchased last year after the boutique had exceeded projected earnings for the third consecutive quarter. I didn't check the message, immediately taking a moment to appreciate the golden hour light casting long shadows across the historic buildings when I finally looked at my phone. Daniel's follow-up was exactly as petty as I'd expected. "Don't bother begging Sophia, and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." Sophia, the new receptionist at Hartwell Investments. I'd met her at the company Christmas party last December, watched her laugh too loudly at Daniel's mediocre jokes, noticed how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special, unaware she was simply the latest supporting actress in the tired production of Daniel's fragile masculinity. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called Catherine Winters, the sharp-minded divorce attorney I'd consulted 2 months ago, when I'd found the hotel charges on our credit card statement, 420 naira, at the Lakeside Inn on a weekend Daniel had supposedly been fishing with colleagues. "It's time," I said simply, as Catherine answered, her voice crisp and professional, even at 6:30 on a Friday evening. "He just made his move. The papers are ready." She replied without hesitation. I could hear her typing, likely, already adding this development to my file. "I'll file them first thing Monday morning. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? No rush." I replied, unlocking my car and settling into the leather seat. "Let him think he's won first." Another text from Daniel arrived as I started the engine. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The successful boutique I'd built from scratch after leaving my corporate marketing position. The one that had expanded to include a carefully curated selection of designer clothing accessories and home goods that catered to discerning clients throughout New England. The business that generated more income than Daniel's position, the one whose profits I'd carefully kept separate from our joint finances, despite his increasing suggestions about combining resources. I smiled thinking of the certified letters that would greet Daniel in Miami, the carefully prepared documentation that would dismantle his smug certainty piece by piece. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. The satisfaction would be short-lived. During the 20-minute drive to our house, my house in the exclusive Overlake neighborhood, I called Marisa, my assistant manager. "I'll need you to open tomorrow." I told her, "There's a situation I need to address. Everything okay, Olivia?" Marisa had been with me since I'd opened Lumiere, starting as a part-time sales associate, while finishing her business degree, growing into a trusted second-in-command, who understood both the aesthetic and financial aspects of the boutique. Daniel's leaving, moving to Miami with the receptionist from his office. My voice remained even professional, as if discussing a slight inventory issue rather than the implosion of my marriage. "That absolute bastard!" Marisa breathed, dropping her usual professional demeanor. "Are you all right? Do you need me to come over? I can bring wine and possibly implements of torture." I laughed despite myself. "I'm fine, actually. Better than fine. I've been preparing for this possibility, but I would appreciate you handling the store tomorrow. The new Valextra handbags are being delivered, and I need someone who understands their value to receive the shipment." "Consider it done," Marisa replied. "And Olivia. He's making the biggest mistake of his life." Yes, I agreed. He certainly is. I spent that evening in our house, my house since I'd inherited it from my grandmother, and kept it in my name despite Daniel's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. Another lucky instinct that had paid off the sprawling Victorian, with its wraparound porch and meticulously restored original features, had been in my family for 3 generations, a fact that had always seemed to both impress and irritate Daniel in equal measure. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need, I found our wedding album in the cherrywood cabinet. In the study, Daniel looked so different than before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. In the photos, his smile seemed genuine, his eyes bright with promise, as he looked at me in my ivory lace gown. 12 years had transformed him gradually, so slowly, I'd barely noticed until suddenly I was living with a stranger. These days, he wore shirts too tight for his softening. Middle tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings. At his office used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a man of 45. Crushing it. He'd say after a presentation or, "That's fire," when describing a restaurant. Phrases that made me cringe with their desperate attempt at youthfulness. My phone kept buzzing with texts from him throughout the evening, each one more condescending than the last, as if he were getting drunk on his perceived victory. I've been planning this for months. Sophia understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age. Already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder with methodical precision. Let him dig his hole deeper. Catherine would love his casual admission of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. Each text was another nail in the coffin of his financial future. The last text caught my attention just as I was pouring myself a glass of the Barolo I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. BTW, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company immediately. The wine momentarily forgotten. "Mrs. Keller speaking," I said when the representative answered. "I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately." "Of course, ma'am," replied the representative, her voice professionally sympathetic. "Can you identify the charges in question?" 2 first-class tickets to Miami booked today. Hotel charges at the Royal Palm. And I'll need to remove my husband as an authorized user, effective immediately. "Do you have documentation of the fraud?" she asked, following standard protocol. Text messages from my husband, admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. I'll be happy to forward them to your fraud department. The representative's professional tone couldn't quite hide her satisfaction as she processed the cancellation. "I voided the charges, Mrs. Keller, and removed Mr. Keller as an authorized user. A new card will be issued to you, only arriving within 3 to 5 business days. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" "That covers everything, thank you." I hung up, imagining Daniel and Sophia arriving at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated, their hotel reservation canceled. A small but satisfying first consequence. My phone buzzed again. "Don't worry about the house, I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller." I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Had he convinced himself that his modest contributions to the property taxes somehow translated to ownership? Another buzz, and I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half. My half? Of my business that I'd built myself, funded myself, ran myself while he complained about my long hours and called it my hobby. The business I'd started with the inheritance my grandmother had specifically put in a trust that kept it separate from marital assets. A detail Daniel had apparently forgotten or never bothered to understand. I poured that glass of Barolo after all carrying it to the master bathroom, where I ran a steaming bath scented with the lavender oil I imported from Provence for both personal use and to sell in the boutique's small home goods section. As I sank into the water, I thought about the journey that had led me here. I'd met Daniel 14 years ago at a charity gala in Burlington. I was 24, freshly graduated with my MBA and working in marketing for a large retail corporation. He was 31, handsome in a conventional way, with an easy confidence that I mistook for security. He'd approached me at the bar, complimented my dress a vintage Chanel I'd splurged on with my first bonus, and made me laugh with wry observations about the other guests. Our courtship had been swift and certain. Daniel represented stability. After my somewhat chaotic childhood, with parents who valued freedom over convention, who had traveled extensively and changed careers multiple times, before settling into teaching positions at the university, Daniel, with his 5-year plan and his investment portfolio and his understanding of wine pairings, had seemed the perfect counterbalance to my bohemian upbringing. We married 2 years after meeting a lavish ceremony at a historic estate that Daniel insisted upon, despite my preference for something smaller. "You only get married once," he'd said with certainty. The irony wasn't lost on me now, as I sipped my wine in the cooling bathwater. The early years had been good, or perhaps I'd just been too busy with my career to notice the small fractures forming. Daniel had been supportive when I left corporate life to open Lumiere, though his support had always been tinged with condescension. It's good to have a creative outlet, as if my business degree and marketing experience were hobbies rather than professional qualifications. As the boutique flourished, expanding from clothing to accessories to home goods, his attitude had shifted from condescending support to thinly veiled resentment. Each of my successes seemed to diminish him somehow, though I was careful never to outshine him at the increasingly rare social events we attended together. I'd learned to downplay my accomplishments, to redirect conversations to his work. When colleagues asked about the boutique's expansion, but perhaps the most telling sign had been his reaction. 3 years ago, when I'd been featured in Vermont Business Quarterly, instead of celebration, he'd questioned the photographer's lighting choices. "They make you look older." Critiqued my outfit, "A bit ambitious for your figure." And finally, most revealingly, asked why I hadn't mentioned his support in the interview. No one builds a business entirely alone. The water had cooled, bringing me back to the present. I stepped out of the bath, wrapped myself in a plush robe, and returned to the bedroom, where my phone displayed 3 more texts from Daniel, each more entitled than the last. The final one read, "Make sure my golf clubs are packed properly when you ship my things. The Callaway driver cost more than your first month's rent at the shop." I silenced my phone and settled into bed with the financial documentation I'd been gathering, reviewing each item with the attention to detail that had made my boutique successful. Tomorrow, Daniel would learn some hard truths about credit cards, property law, and separate assets. But tonight I'd enjoy the quiet and plan my next chapter with the same meticulous care I brought to each season's inventory. Morning brought a flurry of increasingly angry texts from Daniel. "What the hell did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me." I silenced my phone and focused on preparing for the day ahead. I'd decided to go into the boutique after all, needing the comfort of routine and purpose. Saturday was always our busiest day, and despite Marisa's capable management, I wanted to be present to remind myself of what I'd built, what was truly mine. Lumiere looked particularly inviting, In the morning light, the antique chandelier I'd sourced from an estate sale in Montreal, casting prismatic reflections across the exposed brick walls. The carefully curated selection of designer clothing was arranged by color rather than type A merchandising choice that had initially raised eyebrows, but had proven to increase sales by encouraging customers to consider pieces they might otherwise overlook. "You're here," Marisa exclaimed as I entered through the back door. "I thought you were taking the day. I needed normalcy," I replied, hanging my coat in the small office behind the sales floor. "And I wanted to check on the Valextra delivery. Already arrived and inventoried." Marisa reported, "They're even more beautiful than the catalog suggested. I've placed them in the front display case." The morning passed in a comforting rhythm of customer interactions and inventory management. I took particular satisfaction in helping a young professional woman select her first investment handbag, explaining the craftsmanship and timeless design that justified the price point. "It's not an expense," I told her. "It's an investment in quality that will serve you for years." Around noon, Daniel's mother, called Eleanor Keller, had always maintained a polite relationship with me, though I'd never quite broken through her reserved New England exterior. "Olivia," she began without preamble, "Daniel told us everything about how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive now, causing problems with his travel plans." I put her on speaker while I arranged a new display of Italian silk scarves, the fine fabrics flowing through my fingers as I created an artful cascade of color. "Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card?" Silence hummed across the connection. Then, "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant. Eleanor." I replied calmly, "I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money? Or maybe the one where he mocked my age and called my successful business a little shop?" Another pause, longer this time. "He did seem a bit cruel in his explanation. I told him that text message was inappropriate. I appreciate the call, Eleanor. I've always respected you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Daniel's family during the proceedings." "Proceedings already?" Her voice had lost its accusatory edge, replaced by something closer to concern. "Goodbye, Eleanor." By late afternoon, Daniel's sister Rebecca was spreading family gossip through mutual friends Caroline, whose husband worked at Hartwell Investments, called to deliver the update with barely contained excitement. Apparently, Daniel and Sophia are stuck at a budget motel near the Miami airport. Their dream vacation has turned into a nightmare. He tried using his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months. Another red flag I'd noticed but chosen to monitor rather than confront Daniel's personal expenditures had increased dramatically over the past year, while his contributions to our joint expenses had remained static despite the promotion he'd received in January. Catherine called with an update while I was helping a customer select evening wear for an upcoming fundraiser. I excused myself, leaving the client in Marisa's capable hands. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. Catherine reported, "Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet?" "Not yet, but he'll get the papers at his new motel address," I replied, making a note in my calendar. His sister shared the details quite willingly. Catherine's laugh held genuine amusement. "Family turning on him already. That's faster than usual. By By the way, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some rather unflattering comments about you. I smiled, thinking of my own documentation. A year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, text messages that proved premeditation. Daniel had been so focused on his grand escape that he'd never considered I might be watching, waiting, preparing. My phone buzzed with another text from him. You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine. I forwarded the text to Catherine immediately, adding it to the growing file of Daniel's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets established before marriage businesses started with inheritance held in trust, and the importance of having a lawyer review the operating agreement before making threats. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dramatic confrontation, but simply being prepared. As my grandmother used to say, while they're plotting, be planning. The emergency hearing on Monday morning was everything I could have hoped for, and more. The Burlington County Courthouse looked particularly imposing in the clear October light, its 19th century granite facade speaking to permanence and authority, a stark contrast to the ephemeral nature of Daniel's Miami fantasy. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal gray Armani suit I'd selected specifically for its understated power. Nothing flashy or obvious, just impeccable tailoring and quality fabric that conveyed confidence without trying too hard. My hair was swept into a simple chignon, my makeup minimal but flawless pearl studs at my ears, the only jewelry besides my watch, a vintage Cartier tank I'd bought myself when Lumiere had its first profitable quarter. Daniel showed up 5 minutes late, clearly having rushed from the airport based on his wrinkled appearance. He'd dressed in what I recognized as his young wardrobe. Designer jeans too tight for a man his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis over a graphic t-shirt that might have looked appropriate on someone 20 years younger. Sophia waited outside her youth, painfully obvious, under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the courthouse hallway, her expression vacillating between defiance and uncertainty. Catherine presented our evidence methodically. Daniel's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit card fraud, his documented history of hidden expenses. Each piece carefully collected over months of quiet observation, presented in a professional binder with color-coded tabs. Your Honor. Daniel's hastily hired lawyer attempted a young man named Bradford, whose ill-fitting suit suggested this was not his usual practice area. My client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Keller's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating? Catherine countered, her voice cool and precise. You mean prudent. My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive, that's smart business. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, reviewed my documentation, the separate property deed, to the house, the boutique's LLC formation papers. In my name, only the trust documentation showing my inheritance had remained separate from marital assets. The careful separation of business and personal finances that Daniel had always complained about as unnecessarily complicated. Mr. Keller. The judge addressed Daniel directly, her tone suggesting this wasn't her first encounter with a middle-aged man who thought rules didn't apply to him. You admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence visibly deflating under the judge's direct questioning. I was just trying to make a clean break by committing financial fraud. The judge raised an eyebrow, the gesture conveying volumes of skepticism. And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets. The business grew during our marriage. Bradford tried again, shuffling through papers that seemed hastily assembled compared to Catherine's meticulous presentation. My client is entitled to. The business was established before the marriage, with funds from a protected trust. Catherine interrupted smoothly, pointing to the relevant documentation. Mrs. Keller maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned. I watched Daniel's face as reality started sinking in. He thought this would be easy. Empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He'd never bothered to understand my insistence on keeping things separate, had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive and untrusting. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. The judge announced closing the folder containing our documentation. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Keller is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. But that money's gone. Daniel protested, leaning forward with an expression of panic. We spent it on... Then I suggest you find a way to replace it. The judge cut him off with practiced authority. And Mr. Keller, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with paramours. I'm granting the temporary restraining order regarding financial assets. We'll reconvene in 30 days for the full hearing. Outside the courthouse, I heard Sophia asking Daniel about their Miami plans, her voice high with anxiety. What are we supposed to do now? I gave up my apartment. His response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor heading back to the business he'd never understood or respected. The autumn air held the promise of change, of fresh starts, of carefully laid plans. Coming to fruition, the next few weeks brought a string of increasingly desperate moves. From Daniels, he tried claiming the boutique had been his idea during an impromptu visit that Marisa handled beautifully, escorting him out while I continued helping a client select a mother of the bride ensemble. He remembered investing money in its early days, a laughable claim given that every dollar was meticulously accounted for in my business records. He even suggested he'd been my business partner all along, a claim quickly disproven by the LLC operating agreement that listed me as sole owner and manager. He's getting desperate, Catherine observed during one of our update calls. His credit cards are maxed out. The joint account is frozen until he replaces what he took, and his personal savings seem to be minimal. His lawyer called to discuss settlement options already, which is unusually early. I think they know they're in a weak position. What about Sophia? I asked, genuinely curious about the young woman who'd become entangled in Daniel's midlife drama. Her social media shows they're staying at her studio apartment now. Catherine reported with a hint of satisfaction. Apparently living on a receptionist's salary isn't quite the glamorous escape he imagined. She posted yesterday about learning to compromise and tight quarters for two people. Daniel's family started reaching out, their tone markedly different from their initial accusations. We had no idea, his sister Rebecca admitted during an unexpected visit to the boutique. She ran her fingers over a silk blouse, not meeting my eyes. He told us you'd been cold, controlling that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts, the way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew. His mother called again, this time in tears. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger, I raised him better than that. I thought I did anyway. I let their calls go to voicemail. After the initial conversations, their support too little and far too late to merit my attention. They'd believed him without question initially, and their current concern seemed motivated more by his spectacular failure than genuine remorse. The boutique thrived, ironically boosted by local gossip about my situation. Women started coming in specifically to show support, often leaving with far more than they'd planned to buy. The solidarity among female clients was unexpected but heartening. Each purchase a small act of defiance against men who underestimated women's financial acumen. My ex tried something similar. One customer confided while buying a handcrafted leather tote that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Thought he'd take everything in the divorce, including my grandmother's jewelry that was never even in our shared assets. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. They mistake kindness for weakness. I agreed, carefully wrapping her purchase, and consideration for acquiescence. My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Daniel, his tone swinging between anger and manipulation as his Miami dreams crumbled around him. "You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support." I forwarded each message to Catherine without responding, letting him dig his hole deeper with every desperate communication. His words had long since lost their power to hurt me. Each text merely confirming I'd made the right decision to prepare for this eventuality. Through the grapevine, specifically, Rebecca, who seemed determined to earn back my good graces through a steady stream of family information. I heard Sophia was having second thoughts about her choice of partner. Apparently sharing her studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. The age gap that had seemed exciting during secret hotel meetings felt different in the harsh light of daily reality, particularly when that reality included Daniel's increasing frustration with his financial limitations. She posted about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes yesterday. Catherine mentioned during a preparation call for our upcoming hearing and removed her relationship status this morning. The comment section on her post is quite illuminating. Apparently, she's confided in several friends about his controlling behavior and unrealistic expectations. I almost felt sorry for Daniel. Almost. But then I remembered his "ha-ha" after telling me he'd emptied our account, the casual cruelty of his comments about my age, the way he'd assumed I'd be helpless without him, despite all evidence to the contrary. Instead of pity, I felt something else: pride in my foresight, in my quiet strength, in my ability to protect myself while he underestimated me at every turn. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Daniel's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Sophia was noticeably absent. She'd moved on to a co-worker her own age. According to the office gossip, Caroline continued to relay with enthusiastic detail. Daniel had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe apparently returned to help repay the joint account he'd emptied. Bradford looked tired, probably from trying to find non-existent loopholes in my documented separation of assets. Your Honor. Bradford attempted one last time, his tone suggesting even he knew this was futile. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support and networking opportunities. Moral support. Catherine interrupted, pulling up text messages on her tablet. Like these text messages belittling Mrs. Keller's business as a little shop, or these social media posts referring to it as her hobby. As for networking, we've documented exactly 3 clients who came through Mr. Keller's connections in 5 years of operation, compared to Mrs. Keller's marketing efforts that brought in over 2,000 clients during the same period. The judge had clearly seen enough. The final settlement reflected my careful planning and Daniel's careless assumptions. I kept my house, my business, and my separate assets. Daniel got his personal possessions, his car, which was worth less than he owed on it, and his retirement account, which had been systematically underfunded due to his preference for immediate gratifications over long-term planning. "You've destroyed me," he hissed as we left the courthouse, his face flushed with the particular anger of a man who'd assumed privilege only to discover accountability instead. "I'll have to move back in with my parents." "No, Daniel," I replied calmly, straightening the lapel of my tailored jacket. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too." Eleanor was waiting outside, ready to drive him to her house in Shelburne, his new home at 45. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on anyone present. The man who'd mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom, while I continued running my successful business, expanding into online sales, and considering a second location. "You planned this all along." He accused, his voice rising enough to attract attention from others leaving the courthouse. "You knew this would happen." "No," I corrected him gently. "I just paid attention. And unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records." Eleanor stepped between us, her expression suggesting she'd finally seen her son clearly. "That's enough, Daniel. You've embarrassed yourself enough already." As they walked away, I heard her start in on him. "Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old emptying bank accounts, sending those horrible texts." I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Daniel had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he'd merely set my carefully laid plans in motion, plans that would now allow me to move forward unencumbered by his limitations and insecurities. My phone buzzed, not with text from Daniel this time, but with notifications of new orders from Lumiere's recently launched website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he'd imagined. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Lumiere had expanded to a second location in a newly revitalized area of downtown Burlington. The irony wasn't lost on me while Daniel struggled to rebuild his life. The little shop he'd dismissed was thriving beyond even my optimistic projections. I'd hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining traction nationally, particularly among women who appreciated the carefully curated selection and the personal shopping assistance we offered via video consultation. News of Daniel's situation trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He'd tried dating apps but found women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents, still bitter about his divorce and financially precarious. Younger women, having heard about his history through office gossip, steered clear. Sophia had apparently warned her social circle about him, sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back after she'd left. His career suffered too. Hartwell Investments' HR department had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand that had damaged his standing with senior management. The promotion he'd been expecting went to someone else, someone who didn't have a history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination. Rebecca told me during an unexpected visit to the boutique, she'd become a semi-regular customer, perhaps out of guilt or possibly genuine appreciation for the merchandise. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see Daniel's sister shopping in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Daniel had alienated his own family with his behavior. I know we didn't support you at first. She admitted running her fingers over a silk scarf that complemented her complexion perfectly. He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. Catherine kept me updated on Daniel's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied his claim of unfair distribution, dismissed based on the overwhelming evidence of his own actions. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke. She told me laughing over lunch at a new bistro near the courthouse. The judge asked if, haha, made theft less illegal. Lumiere's success brought unexpected validation beyond financial rewards. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who'd protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice about keeping business and personal finances separate, about protecting their assets before entering partnerships, both business and personal. The best protection is preparation. I told one young woman who reminded me of Sophia, bright and ambitious, but perhaps too trusting. And always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it usually is. Eleanor called occasionally, usually after Daniel had done something particularly self-destructive. He'd tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. He'd gotten involved with a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns, but delivered only further debt. Each attempt to recover his former lifestyle just dug him deeper into trouble. I don't know where we went wrong with him. She sighed during one call, her voice heavy with parental disappointment. His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet, if he'd just take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else. You, Sophia. His company, the judge, the unfair legal system. I listened politely but maintained emotional distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward filled with plans for a third boutique location and a possible expansion into luxury accessories that would complement our clothing lines. The only reminder of Daniel's impact on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office. His final text before I blocked his number. Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age. Below it sat my latest business award from the Vermont Small Business Association, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for Lumiere's third location, an elegant space in a renovated mill building along the waterfront. The event attracted local media business leaders and loyal clients who had supported my vision from the beginning. The story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand through strategic growth and exceptional customer service. During the event, Sophia unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever in her fitted dress and stylish boots. Or maybe I just felt that much stronger and more secure in comparison. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her small purse like a shield, as she approached me near the champagne table. I owe you an apology, she said quietly, her voice nearly lost in the ambient jazz and conversation filling the space. I believed everything he told me about how you were cold, controlling how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough. I continued arranging a display of handcrafted Italian leather goods, giving my hands something to do while maintaining my composure. Those weren't his dreams, Sophia. They were escapes. There's a difference. I know that now. She paused, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. A nervous gesture that reminded me of her youth. He tried to move in when you froze. The accounts thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes. I actually laughed at that, than the sound genuine rather than bitter. Let me guess he had big plans but no way to fund them. Exactly. She rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of the very young. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off. Once he got that promotion. Once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value. It was exhausting. And now, I asked, genuinely curious about her path forward. I'm dating someone my own age. She replied with a small smile. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real together. And I've enrolled in business classes. Watching you handle everything. It was inspiring, actually. After she left, Marisa appeared at my elbow, her curiosity palpable. Was that the girlfriend? No. I replied, surveying the successful event unfolding around us. That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did. I gestured to a young couple examining our collection of artisanal jewelry. Let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line. I think you might be onto something with the local artisan collaboration. The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, of resilience, of the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets and trusting their instincts. Eleanor called one last time not to discuss Daniel, but to thank me. You taught our family an important lesson, she said, her voice carrying the weight of difficult realizations. About enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Daniel's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems. But we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family. Showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a 4th location, this one, in a neighboring town, with a growing population of young professionals who appreciated quality and craftsmanship. Daniel had intended to diminish me to trade me in for a younger model and take half of everything I'd built. Instead, he'd inadvertently pushed me to become even stronger, more successful, more determined to create something lasting. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Daniel filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. Thought you'd enjoy that. I smiled, thinking of him in his childhood bedroom, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. 2 years after Daniel's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference in Boston. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a successful business through strategic planning and financial independence. My story had evolved from cautionary tale to inspiration, proof that preparation and careful documentation could turn potential disaster into opportunity. During the Q&A session, a woman in her early 30s asked about keeping business and personal finances separate. My husband says I'm being paranoid that marriage means sharing everything, but something doesn't feel right about combining all our accounts. My ex-husband said the same thing. I replied, looking out at the room full of attentive women taking notes. Right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia, it's prudence. The Lumiere brand had grown to 5 locations across Vermont and New Hampshire, each more successful than the last. The little shop Daniel had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines focused on retail innovation and customer experience. Through mutual friends, I heard Daniel had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage in a neighboring town. He'd had to take a lower-paying job after Hartwell Investments eliminated his position during restructuring, citing the need to streamline middle management. His dating profile still listed him as young at heart, though his profile photo was clearly outdated. Sophia, ironically, had become a regular customer at my original boutique location. She'd earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting company, occasionally contracting with Lumiere for targeted campaigns. You inspired me. She told me once while we discussed strategy for a holiday promotion, showing how a woman can build something lasting instead of falling for empty promises and quick exits. I kept Daniel's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come. Below it hung a sign that I'd commissioned from a local artist, elegant script on handmade paper. Success is the best revenge. At the 5-year anniversary celebration of Lumiere's original location, I stood addressing my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a single little shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire that now included a design studio, online sales platform, and strategic partnerships with artisans throughout New England. Eleanor attended, though I hadn't sent her a formal invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me. Elegant in her 70s, wearing a cashmere wrap she'd purchased from my second location. I saw Daniel yesterday, she said, smoothing the soft fabric with appreciation. He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't understand that he didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away. I thought about that text message, his casual cruelty, his assumption that I would crumble without him. He'd expected me to beg to break, to prove him right about my desperation. Instead, I'd built something stronger than before, something that would outlast his brief moment of triumph. Each new boutique location was a testament to what women could achieve when they stopped dimming their light for insecure men. The young sales associate I'd hired last month, coincidentally named Sophie, approached with a question about the new inventory system I'd implemented. As I explained the process, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of the boutique's ornate mirrors. I saw what Daniel had failed to see 5 years ago. Not a woman getting older, but one getting wiser, stronger, more successful with each passing year. His cruel text message had been intended as an ending. Instead, it had been a beginning. Not just for me, but for every woman who heard my story and realized she deserved better than someone else's midlife crisis. In the reflection, I saw not the woman Daniel had discarded, but the one I had become in spite of him, perhaps even because of him. The text that was meant to destroy me had instead been the catalyst for my Renaissance proof that sometimes the most devastating endings can lead to the most triumphant new beginnings. As the 5th anniversary celebration wound down, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the journey that had brought me here. The boutique was quiet now, just a few employees finishing cleanup while soft jazz played through the hidden speakers I'd had installed during our last renovation. I wandered through the displays, straightening a sleeve here, adjusting a handbag there. Small touches that probably weren't necessary, but had become habitual over years of building Lumiere from concept to empire. You don't have to do that, you know, said Marissa, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. After 5 years as my right hand, she'd developed an almost uncanny ability to anticipate my thoughts. We have people for straightening now. I accepted the glass with a smile. Old habits. Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come. From 1 location to 5, from 3 employees to 30. She agreed, surveying the space with justified pride. Though you never seemed to doubt it would happen, I had doubts. I admitted something I rarely shared with anyone. Especially in the beginning. But not letting those doubts show was part of the strategy. We settled into the custom-designed seating area near the dressing rooms. A luxurious space with velvet armchairs and a small marble table that encouraged companions to linger while friends or partners tried on clothing. It was one of many touches that differentiated Lumiere from other boutiques. We didn't just sell products. We created experiences. Can I ask something personal? Marissa ventured after a moment of comfortable silence. After 5 years and countless crises handled together, I think you've earned that right. Do you ever regret not seeing the signs earlier with Daniel? Before it got to that text message. The question caught me off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because I'd been asking myself the same thing recently. I considered my answer carefully, swirling the remaining champagne in my glass. The signs were there from the beginning, if I'm being honest with myself. I said finally, not of the affair specifically, but of his character, the way he took credit for ideas that weren't his, the casual belittling comments disguised as jokes, how he needed to position himself as the expert in every situation, even topics he knew nothing about. A classic insecure male syndrome. Marissa nodded sagely. Exactly. But there were good times, too, especially in the beginning. He could be charming, attentive when he wanted something, and I was younger, still proving myself. There's a certain validation that comes from being chosen by someone who presents as successful. I set my glass down, memories surfacing that I hadn't examined in years. There was this moment about a year into our marriage. We were at a dinner party with some of his colleagues, and the conversation turned to career aspirations. When it was my turn, I started talking about eventually wanting to open my own boutique. Daniel laughed, not overtly cruel, just dismissive, and said, "Olivia has expensive taste. We joke that opening a shop would just be a way for her to get an employee discount." He undermined your dream in front of everyone. Marissa said, her expression darkening. Yes, but so smoothly that objecting would have made me seem humorless or oversensitive. That was his specialty, the subtle undermining that made questioning him seem like an overreaction. I straightened a throw pillow absently. But to answer your question, I don't regret not seeing the signs earlier. I regret not acting on what I saw. There's a difference. Marissa considered this. So when did you start acting instead of just seeing? Honestly, when I found the first hotel receipt, something shifted that day. I realized I'd been living in a state of constant vigilance, monitoring his moods, adjusting my behavior to avoid his criticism, making myself smaller to accommodate his ego. It was exhausting, and for what? To maintain a marriage that existed more in appearance than reality. And that's when you started preparing, she concluded. Yes, though I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for then. Just that something was coming, and I needed to be ready. I smiled at the memory of opening that separate bank account, the first concrete step toward independence. Enough about ancient history. Tell me about the plans for the holiday window displays. Are we still going with the Alpine winter theme? As Marissa detailed her vision for the upcoming seasonal displays, I made appropriate comments, while part of my mind continued its journey through the past. The conversation had stirred memories. I didn't often revisit moments that now seemed like clear warning signs but had once been rationalized away. There was the dinner at Le Petit Bistro 3 years into our marriage, when Daniel had criticized my choice of entree as predictable, then proceeded to order the same dish for himself, claiming he'd discovered it on a business trip to Montreal. The server's confused expression had matched my own, but I'd said nothing, not wanting to embarrass him. Or the weekend trip to New York to celebrate my promotion at the marketing firm, which had somehow transformed into a networking opportunity for Daniel, including dinner with his clients, where I was expected to play the role of supportive wife, rather than accomplished professional in my own right. Small moments easily dismissed individually, but forming a pattern that should have been impossible to ignore. Yet I had ignored it, or at least minimized it, telling myself that all marriages involved compromise, that perfect relationships didn't exist outside of romantic comedies, that Daniel's need for validation was harmless, even when it came at my expense. The truth, which I now allowed myself to acknowledge, was that I had stayed because leaving seemed more frightening than enduring, until suddenly it wasn't. After everyone had gone and I was locking up alone, a rare occurrence now, but something I sometimes insisted on, a connection to my roots as a sole proprietor. My phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in months. Rebecca Keller. Rebecca. I answered, keeping my tone neutral. While we had maintained a cordial relationship after the divorce, we weren't exactly friends. Is everything all right? Not exactly, she replied, her voice tight. It's Daniel. He's in the hospital. He had what they're calling a stress-induced cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but a warning sign. Mother thought you should know. I leaned against the counter, absorbing this information. I appreciate the call. Is he going to be all right? Physically, yes. They're releasing him tomorrow, with medication and strict instructions to reduce stress. She paused. That's not why I'm calling, though. When they took his phone to contact family, the nurse saw his recent search history. He's been obsessively looking at Lumiere's website, your press coverage, social media, everything related to your success. The doctor thinks his fixation on your achievements might be contributing to his condition. I see, I said carefully. And what would you like me to do with this information? Nothing necessarily. Rebecca sighed. I just thought you should be aware. He hasn't moved on, Olivia. After all this time, he's still defining himself in opposition to you. What you have that he lost, what you've achieved, that he can't match, that's unfortunate. I replied, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions. Pity, certainly, but also a distant sadness for the man who had once been part of my life, and now seemed unable to create meaning in his own. But it's not my responsibility to manage Daniel's emotional state. It hasn't been for years. I know, she said quickly. I'm not suggesting it is, I worry about him. Despite everything, he's still my brother. After ending the call, I completed my closing routine with mechanical precision. My mind elsewhere, Daniel's continued obsession with my success was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. His self-worth had always been comparative, measured against others, rather than derived from within. In our marriage that had manifested as needing to be the more successful partner, the more knowledgeable voice, the center of attention. In divorce, it seemed to have transformed into a destructive fixation on what he perceived as a competition he could never win. For a brief moment, I considered reaching out, perhaps suggesting he seek therapy to address this unhealthy pattern. But I quickly recognized this impulse for what it was, an echo of my former role as emotional caretaker, the person responsible for managing his feelings and smoothing his path. That was no longer my job, hadn't been since the moment he'd sent that text message announcing his departure. Daniel's well-being was his own to navigate now. My only obligation was to my own life, my business, and the people who depended on me. When I arrived home that evening to my renovated Victorian, I found a package waiting on the front porch. The return address showed it was from Catherine, who had remained a friend long after our professional relationship had concluded. Inside was a framed article from Business Insider featuring Lumiere, in a piece about successful independent retailers challenging the dominance of chain stores. The note attached read simply, "Seen by millions, the ultimate little shop. Congratulations." I smiled, placing the frame on my desk, beside the mounted text message from Daniel. The juxtaposition was perfect, his dismissal alongside undeniable proof of how wrong he had been. This wasn't about gloating over his misfortune. It was about acknowledging how far I'd come, despite his attempts to diminish me. The next morning, I had a breakfast meeting with investors interested in funding a potential expansion into neighboring states. As I prepared selecting a Navy Armani suit that projected confidence without ostentation, I thought about Daniel, lying in a hospital bed consumed by bitterness over my success. The contrast between our paths since the divorce couldn't have been starker, and the gratitude I felt for having escaped what could have been decades of slow, emotional suffocation was overwhelming. My phone chimed with a text from Marissa. Sophia called the store. She's interested in discussing a formal partnership between her social media company and Lumiere Syed. She has innovative ideas for expanding our digital footprint. I texted back. Set up a meeting for next week. I'm curious what she has in mind. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel's former lover potentially becoming a business partner. But Sophia had proven herself to be talented and insightful. Her youth an advantage in understanding digital marketing trends that were reshaping retail. If a partnership would benefit Lumiere, I was more than willing to set aside the complicated history of how we'd come to know each other. The investors were waiting when I arrived at the Morning Table Burlington's premier breakfast establishment for business meetings. 3 men and a woman, all in their 50s, representing a capital group that specialized in retail expansion. They stood as I approached, offering handshakes and congratulations on Lumiere's recent press coverage. "Ms. Keller," began Thomas Reynolds, the senior partner, once we were seated. "We've been following Lumiere's growth with interest. Your approach to experiential retail and community building is exactly what we look for in potential partners." I nodded, accepting the compliment, without effusive gratitude, a negotiation technique I'd perfected over years of business dealings. Lumiere's success comes from understanding our customers as individuals, not demographics. Each location reflects its community while maintaining our core aesthetic and quality standards. "That's precisely why we're interested," said Elaine Morgan, the only woman in the group whose sharp eyes suggested she missed nothing. Too many retailers try to replicate exactly the same experience regardless of location. Your adaptability without loss of identity is impressive. The conversation continued over poached eggs and freshly squeezed orange juice, discussing expansion possibilities, capital requirements, and partnership structures. I listened more than I spoke, evaluating not just their offers, but their understanding of what made Lumiere special. By the time coffee arrived, I had a clear sense of their vision and whether it aligned with mine. Your proposal is interesting, I said, finally stirring a small spoon of raw sugar into my espresso. But I notice you've mentioned accelerated growth several times. Lumiere's reputation is built on careful curation and personal connection. I'm not interested in rapid expansion that might dilute what makes us successful. Reynolds exchanged glances with his colleagues. We understand your concern, Miss Keller. Perhaps we could revisit the timeline to ensure quality isn't compromised. That would be a start. I agreed. I'll need to review your full proposal with my team before making any decisions. Lumiere isn't just my livelihood. It's my legacy. I won't risk its integrity for faster growth. As I left the restaurant, I felt a familiar surge of confidence. 5 years ago, I might have been flattered by their interest, eager to please potential investors regardless of whether their vision matched mine. But experience had taught me that true partnership required alignment of values, not just financial opportunities. If these investors couldn't understand what made Lumiere special, their capital wasn't worth the compromise. My phone rang as I reached my car. Eleanor Keller, a call I hadn't expected after Rebecca's news the previous evening. Olivia, she began without preamble, her voice carrying the slight tremor of advancing age. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. Eleanor, is everything all right? Rebecca mentioned Daniel was in the hospital. He's being released this afternoon, she confirmed. But that's not why I'm calling. I wanted to let you know that I'm selling the house in Shelburne. It's too much for me to maintain alone, and since Daniel is finally moving into his own place, it seems like the right time. I understand. I said, though, I wasn't sure why she felt the need to inform me of this decision. Will you stay in the area? That's actually why I'm calling. The retirement community I'm considering is just around the corner from your original boutique location. I was wondering if you might have time to meet for tea next week. I'd value your insight about the neighborhood. The request caught me off guard. While our relationship had evolved from the initial hostility following the divorce to something resembling cordial respect, we'd never sought out each other's company. Of course, I heard myself say, I'd be happy to discuss the area with you. Wonderful. And Olivia, I want you to know that I adore the scarf I purchased at your anniversary celebration. I've received numerous compliments on it, including from my bridge group. Several of them have since visited your store. I smiled at this unexpected marketing success. I'm glad to hear that, Eleanor. Our new fall collection just arrived in case you're interested in adding to your collection. After ending the call, I sat in my car for a moment, processing this latest development. Eleanor moving to my neighborhood, potentially becoming a regular presence in my life, was not something I had anticipated. Yet it didn't trouble me as it might have in the early days. After the divorce, time had smoothed the sharp edges of those memories, allowing me to see Eleanor not as Daniel's mother, but as an elderly woman seeking connection in her later years. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, approving final designs for the holiday catalog, reviewing applications for a new assistant manager position at our newest location, consulting with our accountant about year-end tax planning. The rhythms of business had become my sanctuary, a space where decisions were based on data and strategy rather than emotion and manipulation. That evening, as I reviewed the investor's formal proposal in my home office, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the security camera, I was surprised to see Sophia standing on my porch, looking nervous but determined. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," she said when I opened the door, "but I wanted to discuss something in person rather than waiting for our scheduled meeting." I invited her in, curious about what couldn't wait for our official appointment. At 25, Sophia had matured significantly from the naive receptionist who had fallen for Daniel's attention. Her business had grown steadily over the past 2 years, establishing her as one of Burlington's most innovative social media strategists. I've been offered a position with a major digital marketing firm in Chicago, she said once we were seated in my living room. "It's an incredible opportunity, creative director for their retail division, overseeing campaigns for national brands. Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's an impressive achievement, especially for someone your age. Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirt, a designer piece I recognized from Lumiere's spring collection. "The thing is, accepting would mean dissolving my company here, including ending my contract with Lumiere. Before I make my decision, I wanted to discuss another possibility." "I'm listening," I said, intrigued. "What if instead of continuing as your contractor, my company became Lumiere's official digital division? You've mentioned expanding your online presence, possibly even developing a luxury subscription service. With my team integrated into yours, we could implement those plans more effectively than an outside agency." The proposal was unexpected, but not without merit. Sophia's work for Lumiere had consistently exceeded expectations, driving significant traffic to both our website and physical locations. "And you would remain in Burlington rather than taking the Chicago position?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I've built a life here. And frankly, while the Chicago job is prestigious, building something meaningful with a brand I believe in appeals to me more than creating campaigns for whoever has the biggest budget." I considered her carefully. Why Lumiere, specifically? "There are other successful businesses in Burlington that could acquire your company." Sophia met my gaze directly. "Because you built something authentic that stands for more than just profit, and because learning from you would be worth more than any corporate title." Her honesty was refreshing, reminding me of what I had initially found appealing about her, before Daniel had complicated everything. "I'll need to review your company's financials and discuss integration logistics with my team," I said. "But conceptually, I'm open to the possibility." After she left, I returned to my office, adding potential acquisition of Sophia's company to my ongoing projects list. The idea had merit from a business perspective, potentially accelerating Lumiere's digital growth while adding young, innovative talent to our team. The personal history between us added complexity but wasn't necessarily prohibitive. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone chimed with an email notification. The sender's name made my heart skip. Daniel Keller. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Olivia." I saw the Business Insider article, 5th location, opening expansion plans, industry recognition. "You've done well for yourself. Better than I anticipated. My doctor suggests that part of my recovery involves acknowledging things I've been avoiding. So here it is. Your success wasn't luck or timing. You built something significant through hard work and vision qualities I should have recognized and respected when we were together. This isn't an attempt at reconciliation or forgiveness. Just an acknowledgement of reality that's overdue. Daniel, I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the brief message. In all our years together, Daniel had never acknowledged my accomplishments without qualification, without finding some way to diminish them or connect them to his influence. This simple recognition, however belated, was unprecedented. For a moment, I considered not responding. The email required no reply, and engaging might only encourage further contact. But something in the clinical tone, the careful distance of his words, suggested this wasn't a manipulation tactic, but perhaps a genuine attempt at the closure his doctor had recommended. After careful consideration, I typed a brief response. Daniel, thank you for the acknowledgement. I wish you well in your recovery. Olivia, simple, direct, devoid of either lingering resentment or false warmth. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed, realizing that for the first time in years, thoughts of Daniel didn't evoke anger or satisfaction at his downfall. Just a quiet recognition that we had both moved on to the lives we were meant to have. However different from what we'd once imagined, the following week brought a flurry of activity meetings with Eleanor about her potential move. She'd decided on a luxury condominium in the same building where several of Lumiere's regular customers resided. Discussions with Sophia about integrating her company into our operations, and continued negotiations with the investment group, who had revised their expansion timeline to better align with my quality standards. Throughout it all, I maintained the careful balance that had become my trademark. Decisive but not impulsive, innovative but not reckless, ambitious but not at the expense of Lumiere's core values. The business had grown beyond my initial vision, but its success remained rooted in the principles that had guided me from the beginning: quality over quantity, experience over transaction, authenticity over trend chasing. On Thursday afternoon, as I was reviewing architectural plans for renovating our newest location, Marisa appeared in my office doorway with an unusual expression, something between amusement and disbelief. "You have a visitor," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Daniel is here." I set down my pen, taking a moment to collect myself. "Did he say what he wants?" "Just that he'd like a few minutes of your time. He seems subdued, not like before." The before needed no explanation. We both remembered his outbursts during the divorce. The entitlement, the accusations. "Send him in." I decided after a moment's consideration, but stay within earshot just in case. Daniel entered my office with hesitant steps, a marked contrast to the confident stride I remembered. He'd aged visibly in the years since our divorce, his hair more gray than brown, now lines etched deeply around his eyes, his posture slightly stooped as if under invisible weight. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and khakis that looked worn but neat. "Thank you for seeing me." He began, remaining standing until I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly. "What can I do for you, Daniel?" He placed a small package on my desk, rectangular, wrapped in simple brown paper. "I found this while packing to move to my new apartment. I thought you might want it back." Curious, I unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound volume. I recognized immediately my grandmother's recipe book, filled with handwritten family recipes dating back generations. I'd looked for it after the divorce, convinced it had been lost in the chaos of separation. I took it. Daniel admitted, his gaze fixed on his hands. "Not for any practical reason, just to have something that mattered to you. It was petty and childish, and I'm sorry. I ran my fingers over the worn leather cover, feeling the embossed initials of my grandmother. Thank you for returning it. It does matter to me. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. He said, a hint of his old charm surfacing briefly. She saw through me immediately, didn't she? That first Thanksgiving at her house. I remembered the occasion, my grandmother's shrewd assessment of Daniel, her quiet warning, later in the kitchen as we prepared dessert. He'll need to be the sun in your sky, Livy. Make sure that's a role you're willing to play forever. I had dismissed her concerns, attributed them to generational differences, and her protective nature. Another warning sign ignored. She was perceptive. I agreed neutrally. I didn't come here to reminisce, Daniel said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Or to ask for forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable, and we both know it. He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. I came because my therapist suggested that making amends is part of moving forward. Not for the people I hurt, but for myself. And returning the recipe book is your amends. I kept my tone, even neither accepting nor rejecting his gesture. It's a start, a small one. He looked around my office, taking in the awards, the framed press clippings, the evidence of success he had once mocked. You've built something impressive here, Olivia. Something that would have never existed if I hadn't... He trailed off, seemingly unable to directly reference his betrayal. If you hadn't sent that text, I finished for him. If you hadn't emptied our account and run off with your girlfriend, half your age. If you hadn't tried to take half my business in the divorce. He flinched at each point but didn't deny them. Yes, all of that. You're right, I said after a moment. Lumiere as it exists today probably wouldn't have happened without that catalyst. Your cruelty forced me to become more strategic, more independent, more focused than I might have been otherwise. So in a way, I did you a favor. He attempted a ghost of his old self-serving logic emerging. No, Daniel. I corrected firmly. You did me harm. I transformed that harm into growth through my own efforts. There's a difference, and it's an important one. He nodded slowly, accepting the distinction. Fair enough, I won't take credit for your success. God knows I tried to prevent it. The admission hung between us remarkable in its honesty. This wasn't the Daniel I had known, the man who rewrote history to cast himself as hero, who never acknowledged mistakes unless they could be reframed as strategic choices. The heart event changed things, he said, as if reading my thoughts. Lying in that hospital bed thinking I might die, all I could focus on was how I'd failed. Not just in our marriage, but in everything that came after. While you were building an empire, I was clinging to resentment and entitlement. Is that why you've been obsessively tracking Lumiere's progress online? I asked, deciding directness was the only appropriate approach. Rebecca mentioned the nurses found my company's website in your search history. He had the grace to look embarrassed. At first, I was looking for evidence of your failure proof, that I was still somehow superior, despite evidence to the contrary. Then gradually, it became something else. Watching your success became a way to track a life I could have been part of if I'd made different choices. The admission was surprisingly vulnerable, stripped of the defensive posturing I'd come to expect from him. What happens now, Daniel? You've returned the recipe book, made your amends. What's next? I'm moving to Boston next month. He replied, My cousin offered me a position in his accounting firm, entry level at my age. But it's a fresh start, away from the constant reminders of what I lost, what I threw away. He stood signaling the end of our conversation. I won't contact you again after this. Olivia. You've built a good life, one that doesn't need the complications I represent." As he turned to leave, I found myself asking the question that had lingered for years. Was it worth it, Daniel? Trading our marriage for what you thought would be freedom? He paused at the door. His shoulders slumped under the weight of the question. No. He said simply, freedom bought with deception and cruelty isn't freedom at all. It's just a different kind of prison. After he left, Marissa appeared with 2 cups of tea, a ritual we'd established for moments that required processing. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, settling into the chair Daniel had vacated. "Are you okay?" "Surprisingly, yes," I replied, accepting the tea gratefully. It was like seeing a ghost, familiar in form but lacking substance. The man I married doesn't exist anymore, if he ever did. The recipe book is a nice recovery, she observed, nodding toward the leather volume on my desk. Your grandmother's right. You've mentioned it before. It contains more than recipes. I explained, opening it carefully to show her the handwritten notes in the margins. Observations about life, bits of wisdom, reminders of family values. It's a family history in food form. Each dish connected to memories, celebrations, ordinary days made special through shared meals. A legacy. Marissa nodded, understanding. Yes, but not just of the past. The blank pages at the back were meant for my contributions, recipes I would add to the family collection. I ran my fingers over the empty pages, thoughts forming that had been dormant for years. Perhaps it's time to start filling them. The visit from Daniel, unexpected as it was, had closed a chapter that had remained partially open, despite the divorce proceedings, the business success, the new life I'd built. His acknowledgement of wrongdoing hadn't erased the harm, but it had removed the last lingering question mark, the possibility, however remote, that I had somehow misunderstood or overreacted to his betrayal. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my kitchen, a space I had renovated to my own specifications after the divorce, with professional-grade appliances and Italian marble countertops, I found myself pulling out ingredients for my grandmother's famous apple spice cake. Following her handwritten instructions, I measured and mixed, finding comfort in the familiar motions. As the cake baked, filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg, I opened my laptop to check the final sales figures for the day. All 5 Lumiere locations had exceeded their targets. The new online store was showing strong growth in out-of-state orders, and Sophia's preliminary integration plan for her digital marketing team looked promising. Success was a complex equation part, preparation part, innovation part, intuition part, sheer persistence through difficulty. The text that had once threatened to destroy my life had instead become the foundation for something stronger, more authentic, more truly mine than anything that had come before. The timer chimed and I removed the perfectly golden cake from the oven. After it cooled, I took a photo and opened the recipe book to one of the blank pages at the back. There beneath a carefully attached print of the image I wrote, Grandmother Eleanor's apple spice cake, prepared on the day of reconciliation with the past. The first entry in my chapter of the family legacy. 3 months later, as winter blanketed Burlington in pristine snow, I stood before an audience of business students at the University of Vermont. The invitation to speak about entrepreneurship and resilience had come from the dean himself, who had become a regular customer at Lumiere after his wife introduced him to our bespoke shirt collection. Success isn't linear, I told the rapt faces before me. It's not about avoiding failure, but about transforming potential devastation into opportunity. Every business faces setbacks, market changes, economic downturns, competitive pressures. The question isn't whether these challenges will come, but how you'll respond when they do. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Keller, your company has been recognized for its innovative approach to retail during a time when many brick-and-mortar stores are struggling. What's your secret? Understanding that shopping isn't just about acquisition. I replied, it's about experience connection, the story behind each item. At Lumiere, we don't sell products. We curate possibilities. Each piece in our collection represents a potential memory. The dress you wear to a significant interview. The scarf that becomes your signature accessory. The gift that communicates care when words aren't enough. But how do you balance that experiential focus with profitability? Asked a serious-looking young man in glasses. Especially when online retailers can offer similar products at lower prices. By recognizing that price is only one factor in purchasing decisions. I explained, value encompasses quality, sustainability, uniqueness, and the intangible satisfaction of supporting businesses that align with your values. Lumiere's customers aren't buying anonymously mass-produced items. They're investing in pieces with provenance, craftsmanship, and meaning. The questions continued about financing growth, managing personnel, adapting to changing market conditions. Each answer drew not just from business theory, but from lived experience, from the lessons learned through building something from scratch and protecting it against threats, both external and personal. After the presentation, as students lingered to ask additional questions, I noticed Eleanor Keller sitting in the back row, elegant in a camel hair coat with one of Lumiere's silk scarves arranged artfully at her neck. She waited until the crowd had dispersed before approaching. That was quite impressive. She said, genuine admiration in her voice. No wonder those young people were captivated. You speak with such conviction. Thank you for coming. Eleanor. I replied, surprised but not displeased by her presence. I didn't know you were interested in business lectures. I'm interested in understanding you better. She admitted, Daniel is settled in Boston, now focused on his new position, and from what Rebecca tells me, doing well with his therapy. It seemed time to establish my own relationship with you, independent of him. The statement was unexpected but not unwelcome. Over the past months, as Eleanor had settled into her new condominium near Lumiere's original location, we had developed a cordial relationship built around occasional tea meetings and her regular visits to the boutique. But this explicit desire for connection represented a new phase. I'd like that, I said simply. We walked together through the campus, snow crunching beneath our boots, our breath visible in the crisp winter air. I've been thinking about legacy lately, Eleanor said as we passed the university's historic chapel. What we leave behind, how we're remembered. A natural consideration at your stage of life, I observed. Yes, but not just for me, for you as well. She stopped turning to face me directly. Olivia, you've built something remarkable with Lumiere. But is it the sum total of what you want your life to represent? The question caught me off guard with its directness and insight. What else did you have in mind? That's for you to determine. But I've watched you these past months. Your dedication to your business, your employees, your vision. You have so much to offer beyond retail. However exceptional your approach to it might be. As we continued walking, her words settled into my thoughts, connecting with questions that had been forming at the edges of my consciousness. Lumiere was thriving, its growth steady and sustainable, its identity firmly established in the marketplace. Sophia's integration had added fresh energy and digital expertise, while Marissa's promotion to Chief Operating Officer had freed me from much of the day-to-day management. What would come next? What else might I build, nurture, develop, beyond the business that had both saved and defined me these past years? The answer arrived unexpectedly 2 weeks later during a meeting with the Burlington Women's Business Alliance. The organization had invited me to speak about my journey, but the conversation afterward turned to the challenges facing female entrepreneurs. Specifically, access to capital remains the biggest barrier, said Judith Martinez, who had recently launched a sustainable home goods company. Traditional lenders view women-owned businesses as higher risk despite evidence to the contrary. And mentorship, added Sonia Williams, whose technology startup was gaining traction, but struggling with scaling. Finding someone who's navigated these waters successfully and is willing to share their knowledge that's invaluable but rare. As I listened to these women share their challenges I had faced and overcome through a combination of preparation, determination, and the financial foundation my grandmother's inheritance had provided, an idea began to take shape. The next morning, I called Catherine, whose legal practice had expanded to include a focus on women-owned businesses. I need your advice on establishing a foundation, I said without preamble, specifically one focused on supporting female entrepreneurs through microloans, mentorship, and business education. Interesting pivot. She replied, the sound of papers shuffling in the background, suggesting she was already taking notes. Are you thinking of stepping back from Lumiere? Not entirely. But the business is stable, the management team is strong, and I'm finding myself drawn to a different kind of challenge. I outlined my vision, a foundation that would combine financial support with practical education and ongoing mentorship, helping women transform viable business concepts into sustainable enterprises. It's ambitious, Catherine observed when I finished. But then so was opening a luxury boutique in a secondary market during an economic downturn. When have you ever shied away from ambition? The Keller Foundation for Women's Entrepreneurship, launched 6 months later, funded initially by a significant personal investment and subsequently supported by a consortium of business leaders impressed by both the concept and my track record. Our first cohort included 12 women with promising business ideas, ranging from artisanal food production to innovative childcare solutions to technology, addressing healthcare access. As I walked through the foundation's newly renovated offices, a historic building downtown that had once housed a textile mill where women had labored for minimal wages, I felt a sense of completion. I hadn't anticipated Lumiere would always represent my response to betrayal, my declaration of independence, my proof that underestimation could be a powerful motivator. But the foundation represented something different, not a reaction, but an initiation, not a defense, but an offering, not a statement about the past, but an investment in the future. It was. I realized the answer to Eleanor's question about legacy, what I wanted to leave behind beyond a successful retail operation. 7 years after Daniel's cruel text message, I stood at the podium during the foundation's first graduation ceremony, watching as 12 women presented their business plans to an audience of potential investors, mentors, and community supporters. Each presentation demonstrated not just viable business concepts, but the confidence and strategic thinking we had worked to develop over the 9-month program. Today marks not an ending, but a beginning. I told the assembled guests after the presentations concluded, these 12 women are embarking on journeys that will transform not just their own lives, but their communities. They've developed the skills, knowledge, and networks necessary to navigate the challenges ahead, and they'll continue to support each other through the Foundation's alumni program. From the front row, Eleanor Keller nodded in approval, her eyes bright with what might have been tears. Beside her sat Rebecca, who had recently joined the Foundation's board of directors, contributing her expertise in human resources. Sophia stood at the back of the room leading her team in documenting the event for social media and the Foundation's website. Marisa had taken a half day from managing Lumiere's operations to attend her pride in my new venture evident in her enthusiastic applause. As the ceremony concluded and guests mingled during the reception, I found myself standing beside the refreshment table, momentarily alone amidst the celebratory crowd. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the article about your foundation in the Boston Globe. Congratulations on building something meaningful. I didn't respond, didn't need to. The acknowledgement was nice, but no longer necessary for my sense of validation or success. Daniel had become what he was always meant to be in my life. Story, a character from an earlier chapter, significant in the development of the plot, but no longer active in the narrative, the true story. My story had continued without him evolving in ways neither of us could have predicted on that autumn day when his cruel text had set the wheels in motion. What he had intended as an ending had been merely a plot twist, a turning point that had redirected my journey toward unanticipated destinations. A young woman approached one of the Foundation's graduates, whose business plan for mobile healthcare services in rural Vermont had particularly impressed the investors, Ms. Keller. She began hesitantly. I just wanted to thank you personally. Before this program, I had the idea but not the confidence or knowledge to implement it. You've changed my life. No, I corrected gently. You've changed your life. We just provided tools and support. The vision, the work, the persistence. Those were all yours. As she moved away, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the large windows overlooking the street. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the shocked boutique owner who had received that text 7 years ago. This woman stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her purpose defined not by loss, but by creation. Daniel's final gift, however unintentional, had been freedom, not the momentary escape he had sought in Sophia's youth, and adoration, but the lasting liberation that comes from breaking patterns of dependency and discovering one's true capacity. The cruel text that had been intended to destroy me had instead been the catalyst for my Renaissance proof that sometimes the most devastating endings can lead to the most triumphant new beginnings. 10 years to the day after receiving that fateful text message, I stood in the expanded headquarters of the Keller Foundation, now occupying the entire historic mill building and supporting over 100 female entrepreneurs annually across 3 states. Lumiere had grown to 7 locations with Marisa serving as CEO, while I focused primarily on the Foundation's strategic direction. On my desk sat a framed article from Forbes, featuring me in their Women to Watch series. Beside it, in deliberate juxtaposition, remained the screenshot of Daniel's text. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. The contrast still brought a smile to my face. Not from lingering bitterness, but from appreciation of life's unexpected trajectories. The text that had once threatened to destroy me had instead launched me toward a destiny far more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined within the confines of that marriage. Eleanor, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, had become a valued advisor to the foundation and something approaching a friend to me personally. During our weekly tea meetings, she often remarked on the irony that her son's worst moment had catalyzed my greatest achievements. "It's not about him," I would gently remind her. "It never was." And that perhaps was the most profound lesson of all, that our greatest transformations often begin when someone else's actions force us to reconsider who we are and what we're capable of becoming. Daniel's cruel text hadn't defined me. My response to it had. As new entrepreneurs gathered in the Foundation's conference room for the opening session of our latest cohort, I prepared to share not just business strategies and financial principles, but the deeper wisdom earned through experience, that sometimes the things we think will break us instead reveal our true strength, that preparation matters more than prediction, and that the most empowering words in any language are not, "I love you," but "I believe in you," especially when spoken to oneself. The text that was meant to end my story had instead been merely its inciting incident, the beginning of a narrative far richer, more complex, and more satisfying than anything I could have imagined on that autumn day in the boutique. What Daniel had intended as my final chapter had been merely my prologue. My phone buzzed with a message from Marissa. Lumiere's online sales just hit 7 figures for the quarter. Not bad for a little shop. I smiled, typing back, "Success is the best revenge indeed." But the truth was, revenge had stopped being the point long ago. Success, true success, wasn't about proving Daniel wrong. It was about proving myself right, about trusting my instincts, valuing my capabilities, and building something lasting. Not in spite of his betrayal, but beyond it. As I stepped into the conference room to welcome the new cohort of ambitious women entrepreneurs I carried with me, not just business expertise and hard-earned wisdom, but the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through fire and emerged not just unburned, but illuminated. "Welcome to the beginning of your transformation," I told them, meaning every word. "Trust me when I say that sometimes what feels like your worst moment can become the foundation of your greatest strength. I know this because I've lived it." And in the knowing nods and hopeful eyes looking back at me, I saw the continuation of the legacy I was building, not just a successful business or a thriving foundation, but a ripple effect of empowerment spreading outward to touch lives I would never even meet. That was the true revenge against small-mindedness, against underestimation, against cruelty disguised as liberation. Not merely to survive, but to thrive. Not just to rebuild, but to construct something more magnificent than what was lost. Not simply to move on, but to ascend.